from me. So what we've got in this session is we're going to hear the output from the two previous sessions that we've just done, 4A and 4B. I'm going to ask a reporter from each one of those to come up and give about 5 minutes very shortly just to summarise what that was about. And then we're going to go a reflection from each one of the panel. I'm going to say 2 minutes because I think that's going to be plenty. So I'm going to suggest in an old speaker's rule of three, I would suggest you have 3 brief things to say, and that is absolutely plenty for 2 minutes. So really three paragraphs is it. And then we're going to take a little bit of time for reflection from the floor and come back to the panel for some final thoughts. So that's an enormous amount to pack in, but I think we've had an exciting day and we do want to try and pull this all together to have a sense of both where we've got to today, and also I think we really want to focus this session on where we go from here, because this obviously, I think if we look around the country, we're at a state where we've got lots of climate emergencies being declared. We've still got not more than a handful of plans well developed. We've got a long way to go, and that's what we're aiming to work on today. So if I can begin by asking the Widening the Coalition Workshop 4B, which was upstairs, if we've got a reporter from that workshop.
I believe it's Ian Christie himself, is it not? Jonathan, is that the plan?
Why not Ian have a bit of feedback on the session?
Well, you put me on the spot. What we covered was the fact that the climate emergency and the democracy emergency are co-evolving. They're entwined, and we can't tackle one without the other. And they have to be treated as systemic challenges, which can either make each other worse or can be part of the solution for each other. And one of the things that we focused on most was the emergence of a new kind of optimism about deliberative democracy, and in particular about citizens' assemblies and so on, as part of the answer. And in true academic fashion, I said that we need more research, but also that it's more complicated than we think. And getting it right means getting not just the institutional design right for deliberative democracy, but getting the relationship right between deliberative democracy and the representative democracy that we've got, which has also got many flaws and has got to be fixed. And we can't treat these in isolation. We've got to look at these together. And we've got to look at them in the context of climate emergency as well, which is a very tall order. And what it comes down to is the need to rethink what it means to be a citizen in the 21st century and to learn how to be good citizens through new and revitalized forms of institution. And we can't just look at widening participation through the invention of new forums, although that's a crucial part of it, but we also need to look at what's going on in other sectors, in churches, in the health service, in schools, in universities. And I also gave the example of IKEA, which is trying all sorts of experiments to widen participation in environmental citizenship amongst its consumers through a program called Live La Gomme, which I commend to you, which our universities evaluated. The other thing that came up in discussion was how hard it is to talk about these things still. There is a conspiracy of silence which we all take part in. Even though there's an emergency going on and a civilizational risk, it's very hard to discuss it often with family and friends and colleagues. And there's a lot of research which shows that we've got to find ways of breaking that down. And that's something that new deliberative forums can do, but it can't do all of the work that's needed in breaking down the conspiracy of silence.
Thank you very much, Ian, and I can commend it. It was an excellent session, and I learnt a lot. And my takeaway message was what's always the case in politics, particularly green politics, that we don't want to start from here, but we have to start where we are. Okay, the report from Workshop 4A, which was here about making a local plan. I don't know who's...
Hi, is that working?
Yep.
Okay, I was asked to do this at the end, so I've had a quick rejig, and obviously it's quite difficult when there was a big group with lots of stuff coming back. So for those that weren't there, we were asked to go through a grid of the 5 different key topics under climate change, like waste, food and farming, transport, etc., and then looking individually at the different levels of action that needed to be taken on those. And people felt it was really useful to do that in a crowdsourcing way, although some people felt that actually there was so much more needs to be doing, that we could redo the exercise with more time and in a creative way, with sort of some thought beforehand. So a couple of examples of things that came up, which were great, one was making, under the zero waste topic, making an advert-free zone. Simple as that. Another one was saying that you could have a policy in an area that says no homes are to be built without good access to public transport. Sort of just, examples of actions that could be and should be being taken. One of the things that came back from some of the groups was that there is a disjunction, and I think this was particularly coming from people that are councillors, between what local authorities' aspirations might be, but then them not having the powers to do the great things that they want to do, which then encourages people to set their sights too low. So that was a key issue, and obviously around that is not just powers, but money is an issue. There was some talk about the need to do more good sharing on the emergence of municipal green bonds to fund low carbon actions. Another group was talking about, and I think we all were talking about, the need for more awareness raising to change behaviour, not just infrastructure changes. And obviously we didn't have enough time to develop great ideas on that. Going back to the council predicament of not having enough powers, sorry, I should have said this one before we went on to the next one, is that the consensus in that group was that, and I think it's probably something that everybody feels quite strongly in this room, is that councils really need to provide leadership, even if they can't do the things themselves. It's about encouraging partnerships of businesses, developers, etc., to build zero carbon developments or whatever other leadership role the council can take. And just in terms of a last point, I think that people felt that there was really good ideas, but it would be good to have some sort of platform or way of sharing best practice, so it's very positive solutions orientated. And the final word, which was from my group, we were saying that we did the exercise and we felt like even with all the actions that you could list, there didn't seem like a sense of urgency and, a high level, we need to get on with it and do it now. It's no good doing business as usual. And that's when we were saying we could do with a creative sort of workshop just to talk about how do you get the urgent emergency message across, sort of thing. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, someone that in, grab the microphone. Yep. Okay, and actually, if you can pass that microphone right along. So we're going to go to each person on the panel has got 2 minutes to reflect. I'm going to start with Simon down this end just to change the ends around. 2 minutes, I'm suggesting 3 quick points, preferably not on your own sessions, but on other things you're taking away from the day, if you could.
Okay. I think my first reflection of the day is the amount of energy and enthusiasm in the room, and I think it has gone beyond discussing bus timetables and recycling crisp packets. And that gives me, as someone who's been involved in climate change for 30-odd years, gives me great confidence that something's actually going to happen, and the conversations were at pretty high level. I think the other thing that gave me great encouragement was the number of elected councillors and also officers and influencers in the room. People are actually doing things and changing policy, and I really feel rather than hammering on the outside, there are people on the inside making things happen, and the energy of that last workshop was great. And just a slight reflection, going slightly off Natalie's guidance now. I used to work for Peter Scott, the founder of the WWF and the Wildflower Wetlands Trust. And one of his sayings was, when he was having a bad day, was he would get up and say, is what I'm doing today going to have a benefit for the planet and wildlife in 100 years' time? I would like to change that, and would challenge you, because you're a pretty amazing bunch, to get up every day and say, what am I doing? Is there something I'm doing today that'll help combat climate change? And I would encourage you to have at least one climate change conversation every day.
Okay, I'm going to follow your lead and also depart from that.
I'm not going to be a tough chair, it's fine, except on time.
Yeah. I think what I've been really touched by is the way that the session which I did, which I was talking about, seemed to resonate with people, some people at least. I just love that, obviously. It's nice to think that what you're trying to communicate is resonates with people. But I also think that it's a sign that we're much more ready to have those kind of conversations. And relating to Ian's point about climate silence, that this is starting to get broken, and I think the signs of that are here. And the second point is really just a reminder to all of us that that there's no us and them, and that we're all struggling with this. And as I said in my talk, we all go into periods of disavowal and denial ourselves, and we all struggle with kind of the ethical dilemmas, and to be gentle on ourselves about that and not beat ourselves up about it, and also to be gentle with other people as well, and to resist the temptation to be judgmental. And I'm speaking to myself as much as to you. So that's thank you. Okay, Yves.
Thank you. First of all, on a very personal note, I would say it's not that easy to be probably the only non-native English speaker in the room, but I hope I coped with it. My first point is, sorry.
I was going to say you did well, I think.
And that the message I brought in the session with Paul Allen, that technical, economic feasibility of net zero is here. What is missing is political feasibility, and that's probably what we've talked most about all of the day. And maybe a flowing point, and that's part of the last discussion, is that the sense of urgency that we were asked to bring into our thinking, with those 5 points, doesn't bring, I think, the need for new and disruptive ideas, but mostly on new and disruptive ways of implementing, with the required pace and depth, ideas that already exist. My third point is, and I have 4, is that on a national, along that line still, whether it's on the national or local level, what we need most is work on infrastructures of all kind, physical or societal ones, because that is what the pathway is dependent on, mostly, rather than individual changes. And that calls for developing sunrise policies, because transition is about sunrise of new things, and that's the easy part, but that's also called for accepting sunset policies, and that's the very hard part, and that's something we really need to focus more on. And the fourth point, and that goes back to the first session, I think it's Andrew Sims who referred to the bastards who put us into that mess and the confidence that these bastards have. And my question to Nadine would be regarding the emotions and the kind of things she explained with people concerned with climate change. What are the emotions of those bastards and how we can change it and put pressure on them rather than having the burden on us?
Okay. Thanks very much. Yep.
Okay. So, although I was here to provide some transport input, I just wanted to say with Natalie and others that I was really impressed with the sort of general level of energy and enthusiasm and commitment going on here. And it did make me think, as taking one of Brenda's points, that one of the things out of this ought to be some kind of climate emergency network to share ideas and good practice, but not just good practice, but kind of practicing engagement. How have we actually got people on board in really unpromising places like the gentleman over there from King's Lynn? How do we get, places like that switched on to climate emergency rather than just building big roads and car parks everywhere? So I think, and I think sharing that would be a really helpful thing. So that was my first point. Secondly, I think there's a really important point which affects not just transport but lots of other things, which is about, yes, we need big changes in national policy. We do need to stop building roads and runways and car parks and everything, but that shouldn't absolve us from doing stuff now. And the stuff I was doing, but I also heard it from other sectors, was about the fact that there are things that even at a town and parish council you can do. That's about reflecting the climate emergency. And I think part of that, this goes back to something Ian said, is about finding ways of engaging different groupings. So if you get employers and schools to do travel plans, for example, that's not just about influencing travel behaviour, it's about getting a sort of mass of people, of institutions committed to doing something about climate change, so that an average local enterprise partnership, which is mostly made up of men in golf clubs driving rolls around the place, I'm caricaturing but not much, suddenly realise that there are employers and businesses out there who think differently from that. So I think that kind of thing about engaging different groups is really important. The final thing I wanted to say, Brenda mentioned, I think, the idea of no housing without good public transport. And I think the planning system is something that tends to fall down in those sectors between transport and buildings. Yeah. And actually, it's really important that we have high quality developments, new new developments, but also refurbished existing ones that actually reflect the climate emergency, rather than just our, whatever Taylor-Wimpey want to give us. So I think that the buildings and housing stuff is really critical for lots of reasons, and it tends to get slightly missed out in these things. I was really pleased that Brenda mentioned that. So those are some reflections.
Thank you.
No, you summed it up.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm John Taylor. I'm from an organisation called the Greater South East Energy Hub, and I was leading the workshop at lunchtime on renewable energy. Reflections on the day. I think from what I've gathered from being in the room today and other events this week, there's a really great moment of alignment emerging around all this climate emergency and net zero climate change focus and awareness. So from the people in the room representing councils that have declared a climate emergency motions by wanting to go net zero by 2030. I've been in other meetings this week with utility companies like the water companies, and that sector as well has also declared that they want to achieve net zero by 2030. The power grids want to be part of this as well. With the public awareness and the push from the school strikers and Extinction Rebellion, I think there's a really moment to tie all this together into a big plan that can deliver and transform our society. But the what next bit is going to be crucial, and that's, I guess, the timing is crucial for, all people in this room have been involved in the environmental movement, I imagine, for a while, whether it's through Transition Towns or the Green Party. But I think we've maybe been a bit too early before, but now the economic viability, the technology is there, the political will is there, and the public will is there. So this is the moment to really tie it together and make stuff happen on the ground. We've heard from the Zero Carbon Britain team from CAT today, who've been working on what's viable for the past 10 years. The whole local energy sector as well. We've got coal off the system by building big offshore wind farms and other stuff. But the next wave of decarbonisation will have to focus on oil and gas and petrol and diesel. And that's about our buildings and our homes and our vehicles. So it's a very different phase of decarbonisation compared to what's gone before. And that's why the local and community energy sector and approach is vital to all this. And the point I want to really took from today is just the power of stories that came up in the introductory session from Andrew and Nadine. So I think, using power is not to instill fear and doubt into people, but to inspire and empower action is vital about pointing that positive vision of the future. I was a big fan of the Just So stories by Rudyard Kipling growing up. And I think, Andrew referred to the Namibian fog basking beetle in his opening speech. So I wanted to finish on a nature analogy as well. The way we discuss and frame climate change determines how we often respond to it as well. So we often get told it's a big, scary thing. The politicians like to describe it as an oil tanker, that they're in the steering room and trust them. They're turning the ship around, but it's going to take time. But the trouble with that framing is a big psychological disconnect for everyone else who wants to be involved. So how is me changing a light bulb going to turn around the ship with its own massive inertia? Doesn't really make sense. So I prefer to describe climate change not as an oil tanker, but as a murmuration of starlings. It's got that appearance of being something big, but look closer at it. And it's actually made up of every individual choice and action that's all happening, whether it's in my house, your vehicle, your business, is that cumulative effect of all our decisions. And compared to an oil tanker, a flock is not slow and massive, it's quick and agile. And the way flock change begins in a flock, it starts with one bird. One bird makes a movement that influences the birds around it, and soon that ripples through the whole flock. So in that analogy, change can begin with anyone in this room making a bold decision, sharing that with the people around it, and yeah, action begin today. So be the bird that turns.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, I've got 4 things, 3 in a quick story. The Power of Us, Hope Before Money, Integrity Over Corruption, and the Secret Giraffe Club. Okay, the first one, power in our hands. We need to be the plan makers, the future shapers, the culture shifters, the empowerers, the enablers, the engagers, the entrepreneurs. We need to see round corners because the future isn't the continuation of the past. We need to look beyond what's there to what could be. We need to raise ambitions so the impossible becomes the new normal. So when we look back, we say, how do we get to here? And then secondly, there's no them and us. Nadine has said this. So that means that we can have hope. We can have hope because it's not an emotion, because it's something that's realised through our collective action. We can't do climate emergency on our own. It's a glass half full, and we're the ones who fill it up, even though it's leaking, because people are nicking some of the water. We need to make plans first, and then demand the money later, because that's the way we get the money to do the things we want. It's about us all. It's about the 100%. It's not the 99%. We can't leave anyone behind. So how do we win? We have integrity. Because planning is not something that we have. It's not our CVs. It's not something we do. It's who we are. We have to walk the talk, and talk is the way we walk. We aren't perfect alone, but we can be good enough together. XR, Greta, and Youth Strikers mean we can scale up the action we do on the inside, as long as there's sufficient pressure, which can also be us from the outside. So that brings us to us. I believe that we are the Secret Giraffe Club. Why giraffes? Giraffes have got the strongest hearts of any animal because they have to pump the blood up to a head that's high. And why do we need heads that are high? Because our world puts us in silos, puts us in boxes. We start in a box, we look at a box, we go to work in a box if we're not eco, and then we stare at a box and we come home, we're in a box. And these boxes, our consumer society encourages us to fill up with more and more stuff, which makes the boxes bigger. We try and squeeze our arm out through the side of a box to find a significant other while we have as much stuff as possible. What if we have as much love as possible and then we just have enough stuff? And then if we lift our heads high because we're in the Secret Giraffe Club, we can see over these little boxes. We can see over these sea of boxes and see there's a world beyond boxes. And we become a member of the Secret Giraffe Club because we can see all the other secret giraffes. And we link up ourselves and each other. And in doing so, we can link up the bits of our society that are not linked up. And maybe those walls, those boxes, those silos can come down. Our culture can change. And there'll be no need for the Secret Giraffe Club because we'll all be secret giraffes.
Okay, I think we might have to have a rule that every final contribution includes an animal metaphor or description. That's definitely going well, Ian.
Sure, thank you. Well, it's cruel and unusual punishment to make me follow that, but I'll do my best. Well, of the many grey beards on the platform, I've got the greyest because I've been doing this such a long time, and I'll let you in on a secret, which is that a year ago, I was beginning to feel jaded and pessimistic because I've been doing all this so long, and I've been widely ignored over decades. And what a difference a year makes. I now feel energized, and I have to thank for that Greta Thunberg and XR. I'm moved and inspired by what they've done. It's been amazing. And it shows us how rapidly an insurgency from civil society, which is peaceful, which is prophetic, which is imaginative, can start breaking down the walls which have been erected against taking climate emergency seriously. So I think there's been an amazing breakthrough in the last year, and I am tentatively optimistic now that we're finally seeing a breaking down of all the blockages that we've had in political and public awareness. But we're not there yet, and I want to echo Nadine and Simon saying we still need to talk about it a lot more. There is still a conspiracy of silence in so many areas. We just have to build on what's happened over the last year and keep talking. And the other thing I'd say is that now that emergencies are being declared, now that government has set a net zero carbon target, we need to say, show us the money, and we need to follow the money. Where is the money going to be directed? It's time to start directing it towards green infrastructure, towards re-empowering local government to raise money and to spend money in sustainable ways, and to look for climate inspiration, not just climate emergency, climate inspiration in rebuilding and renovating infrastructures. So we should be asking, where's the money? Show us the money, and let's follow the money all the way through the system to a re-empowered local government system.
Okay, thank you very much. We're now going to take short contributions. I think particularly let's try and focus on going forward, where we go from here. You can get an animal metaphor in there if you really want to, but stress on the short. Anyone from the floor who says something they think they could really share as part of the wrap-up? Okay, I've set the bar too high.
Well, maybe I can just abuse my control of the microphone.
You obviously can, yes.
For 10 seconds while people refine their questions, to say that it struck me more than ever today that we're talking about two parallel agendas, as it were, which also interact. There is the political one and the personal psychological one. And both of these and their interaction are all brilliantly addressed in the Greenhouse book, Facing Up to Climate Reality. This is your last chance to buy at the conference discount of £10.
And that's the only advertising allowed. Right. Okay. Contributions from the floor. Anyone would like to... Yep, right in the black jacket over behind side the pillar.
Hi. Hi. Something that other people raised in conversations, and I also felt, was that everything, a lot of it seemed to be aimed at 2050. Obviously, XR 2025, Youth Climate Strike 2030 would like net carbon zero. Now, some people think that we need mobilisation on the scale of World War II. And I just wonder if we are, and I think some councils also coming in at 2025 for a climate emergency, how would that evolve in a benign way? And is that something that's being considered? Because the stakes are so high. And I think that's something that hasn't really, if we reach tipping points, it's game over. So why wouldn't we want to do it as quickly as possible?
Okay, I'm going to take a number of contributions from the floor. There was one here just in front here.
Hello, thank you. Martin Meadows from Lewis District Green Party. I just wanted to raise in local planning and zero carbon plans about resilience to climate change, because unfortunately, whatever we do, we're going to face the impacts of climate change that are going to happen. We've just got to try and make them as least bad as possible with our zero carbon planning. So what can I raise that as an issue and remind councillors and people here working with local authorities that we've got to prepare our communities for the impacts, the extreme weather, the possible great increase in migration from other areas of the world that are impacted far worse than this country. So we need to build resilience, build cohesiveness, and as well as reducing carbon emissions, we need to prepare for the challenges ahead as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And actually, I will put another advert in here, because Greenhouse did actually do a similar session to this in Lancaster, looking on resilience after the floods and the impact there. And so if you want to look on the website, there's some interesting material there. Dealing with extreme weather. Yep, okay.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to say a couple of things. Firstly, shameless promotion for Friends of the Earth, who I work for, because we've been producing loads of materials which are online to help people that are trying to promote positive action on climate, and we've got a template climate action plan that people can use, as well as a briefing that someone mentioned earlier called 33 Actions Local Authorities Can Take on Climate Change. And if anyone wants to talk to me, I don't have to rush off, so I'm here. And I just wanted to say thank you also for organising today. It's really good to bring people together. But I had a little point that sort of has been slightly bugging me, and I think it was Ian's mention of grey beards that reminded me of it. And I think one of the things that Friends of the Earth is trying very hard to start doing, and we're not doing well yet at all, is about diversification of the movement. We're not going to see change unless it's, you know, seen as not the Waitrose shoppers or, you know, the sort of middle-aged or retired people that are awake to this issue, or some sections of those communities anyway. And I think reaching out to the bright, young, ethnically diverse things where, say, you did this in a year's time and everyone on the platform was under the age of 40 and there was a more better gender balance and ethnicity balance, is what we need to aim for if we're going to bring about change on the climate crisis. And it's not something easy to address. Friends of the Earth is just starting to put that in its own strategies and plans, and I think it's something that everybody in the movement needs to think about if we're going to get the change and wake up beyond the usual suspects.
Right. Any more contributions from the floor? Right at the back, in blue cardigan or similar. I always get stuck with both colours and wardrobe descriptions.
Should something calling itself a climate emergency conference serve vegan food at lunchtime?
I'll pass that over to the panel. I can see Caroline Russell here in the white.
I just wanted to pick up on the resilience point. I had a meeting with the Environment Agency this week who said that they are really struggling with getting land protected for future Thames barriers in like 25, 30 years' time, because local authorities at Purfleet and Tilbury are eyeing up that riverside land for massive new housing developments. So it's just something for anyone here who is a councillor to really be thinking about that resilience point, in particular if you're up against developers, who many councils are really keen to invite developers in because they see it's going to bring jobs and, you know, homes if there's a housing shortage. But we really do need to be thinking about that resilience piece, because we could be looking at, and the Environment Agency certainly are looking at worst case scenarios in terms of the rate of water levels rising.
And one of the most powerful things I've heard on that subject was a session we did at Flooding on the Green Party, where someone said, beside the river, the floodplain is not beside the river, it's part of the river. By building on the floodplain, you're building in the river. Okay. Sorry? Okay, we've got a direct response on the food question. We'll take the microphone over there to let Anne respond directly to that.
Apologies, really. The food was supposed to be all vegetarian and 50% vegan, and I'm not sure why that didn't happen. We'll take it up with the caterers.
Okay. Okay, hang on a second. Wait for the microphone. Just wait for the microphone. That's all I'm asking for, so people can hear you.
I actually wanted to make a much wider point in a minute about the political difficulty we face, but seeing as this has come up, I just think it's really important that we realise that it's the fossil fuel industry that is the number one cause of the climate crisis we're seeing. It is not animals, right? There are far too many animals and there's far too much meat eating going on in the world, but there is a lot of different categories of meat and of ways of consuming, and the argument is not one between veganism and everybody else. It's about how do we have a sustainable land use system. That is a complex and complicated discussion, and it's far too simplistic to just say that vegan is okay, because there's a million questions we could ask about where the vegan food comes from.
Okay. All right. There's one just behind you, if you can pass the microphone back, and there's one right behind you there.
Hi, thank you. As Brenda put in a shameless plug for Friends of the Earth, I'll put in a shameless plug for UK Win as well, the UK Without Incineration Network.
We're working on this advertising ban. We'll see how we go in the future.
It's yet to come. So for those of you who are unlucky enough not to join in our table on waste and zero waste and recycling, I'd be very interested to know if anybody in the room has now been inspired to approach their council to appoint a zero waste officer to replace the waste management officer and to embed zero waste policies in their waste local plan. So please come back to us. I'll be hanging around for a bit afterwards, and if anybody still wants about zero waste and the way that it was to getting a local, please come and talk. Also, a shameless plug for an organisation which will be soft launching next year, which will be called the Circularity Foundation, which will be another grassroots organisation dedicated to zero waste. So watch out for that. It'll be sometime next year. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any more? Last and final call. Yep, just behind you. There. Yep, Maya.
I went to the talk on the just transition, and something that I perhaps haven't realised as much before is how much we talk about transformative change, and we, as green thinking people, are very scared about a world with climate change, but perhaps we don't always realise how much the transformation that we want scares other people. So people are dependent on jobs in the fossil fuel sector, in industry, in so many sectors, and it is really thinking harder about how we make that transformation seem more acceptable, less frightening to people. So that point about sunset and not just sunrise, and that was really the key message that came home to me today, that we really have to make that transformation. We need to ensure that people can see their way from now to a future, and it's not a painful transition. Thank you.
Okay. One more to your right.
It was just an invitation for us to think that the bastards out there and the fossil fuel companies are also inside us, and that the transformation, probably this climate change, is inviting us for a personal transformation, which will be the only one that will really lead to a transformation out there.
Okay. Yep, very quickly.
In that spirit, a last one, which is please remember to leave your name badges in the box by the door.
Okay, that's definitely allowed as an advertisement. I'm going to allow people on the panel to have a very short comeback if you want to, no obligation, because we're right up against it time-wise, and you're going to have literally 30 seconds. I'm going to start from the other end this time, pass the microphone along, and I'm not in control of the microphone, although I might sneak the other one in a sec.
Thank you. I'll take the diversification point, because I can't tell you how many times I'm on panels with bearded men. And it is an issue, and you're completely right to raise it. And I think the expansion of deliberative forums is part of this, because that is a way of ensuring much better representation of diversity than our representative system tends to be. And I really think that can be part of the answer. Another part of the answer is that we need to think about how we engage faith communities, which embed a lot of the diversity in the country, which are doing a lot of things on climate action, environmental action more generally. And that's one of the things I mentioned in my session, that we're working with Chris Rapley, the climate scientist, on imagining how churches can become local convening centres, which can bring lots of diverse groups together.
I'm just going to comment on the 2030, 2050 question. Surrey County Council has a 2050 deadline, which I'm on. I asked for it to be 2030, and they came back with a 20-year time delay. What does that look like? Well, the action this week was to approve the second largest onshore oil drilling in the UK. And the members of the planning committee said things like, more oil is the way to transition from the current amount of oil to less oil. And that we don't need to start transitioning yet, because we don't because our deadline is 2050. Even if we only have to get there by 2050, setting 2050 as a deadline is not the way to get to 2050. Setting 2050 as a deadline is a way of never having a deadline. I don't care when we get to the answer, as long as we're doing as much as we can as quickly as possible. And it's not just about the target date, it's about the rate of action today. So I think less discussion about deadlines and more about what are you actually doing now this day, I think the comment was. And if you're passing an oil drilling thing, then you can't really think that at the same time you can, in that other part of Cognis's diffidence, and Nadine will tell us what the short word was, you know, you can't really say you're doing emergency, because it's not.
Okay.
And yeah, I wanted to address the same question really. This whole discussion around end dates or target dates, I think is a big distraction, because every ounce and every gram of carbon that gets into the atmosphere matters. And it's, yeah, we really need to be thinking about, doing as much as we can, as fast as we can, as you say. Personally, I've found the carbon budgeting approach really good way to think about it. I've looked at my own personal carbon footprint, whether it's heating, transport, diet, and all that. And then if you take the global carbon budget and trying to work it out on a per capita basis, I've worked out I've got between 50 and 75 tonnes personally to use between now and 2050 or whenever. But with my current lifestyle, I'd burn through that within 5-10 years. So actually, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to make it to 2050 because I would have already blown my budget. So I then looked at what I could do by switching to an electric car. That was 80%, 90% of my travel budget reduced. And then again, I could now stretch to 2030 by putting solar panels on my house. So again, I halved the electricity footprint. And again, I could now stretch to 2040. And then if I can keep doing those increments in my personal, where I can influence in my own life, I can make that budget last to the 2100 beyond my own lifetime. So that's the way we need to think about it in our own lives, in our businesses, our institutions.
Thank you. Yes, the point about, I agree with the point about targets. The issue is what one person involved in this debate called the area under the curve. It's how much total carbon is emitted, not whether it's emitted in whether you start to change in 2049, which I think probably what those councillors thought they might do if they were still alive by then. So I think the urgency point is really important. Just on the diversity point, I think that extends to the kinds of solutions we're talking about. Somebody mentioned in one of these events the Ashton Awards, and I was really impressed by the big Birmingham Bike Project, because that wasn't about getting lots of what are known as mammals, middle-aged men in lycra, more cycle lanes. It was about making cycling normal for low-income people from ethnic minorities, and it was really simple, very low cost, but it really worked. And I think more of those schemes, and the more we can spread knowledge about those, is the kind of thing we need to do, because it's about demonstrating that a climate emergency, an action on a climate emergency, can be for everybody, not just for the sort of people in this room.
Thank you. Regarding long-term targets, I think we should not forget that agreeing on the need for long-term target and action was a necessary step to discuss action. So now we all agree on long-term objectives, and it's time to discuss on short-term action, which is consistent with those long-term objectives. Regarding some of the issues that have been raised, 2 lessons from scenarios like the one from CAT or Negawatt first. They are based on a systemic approach, which means that the kind of net zero pathway that they are proposing is also taking into account a lot of sustainability issues. And these pathways are actually also answers to biodiversity, water, land use, raw materials depletion issues. And so I mean, regarding the tipping point or the resilience issues, I mean, these pathways are no regret pathways anymore, not only from a climate perspective. And regarding the sunset, sunrise policies and the need to have a policy making that addresses that, these scenarios show that this kind of pathway is a collective opportunity from an economic point of view, for the global economy, for jobs. So it's really not a matter of constraining us to these pathways. It's really a matter of explicitly addressing the issue of sharing efforts and benefits. That's what Just Transition is about. And we've heard this morning that the New Deal policy is a way of addressing this.
I think I'll respond to the point about personal transformation, and I agree. However, I also think that that inner and outer is so kind of linked that you can't separate the two out, and so there's a cultural dimension to all of this. And my own view is that the personal shift, the cultural shift that we need is around how we relate to the rest of nature. And until we, as a culture, still have this idea that humans are separate from nature, that we're superior to nature, that we have an entitlement to exploit the living world for our own ends, I don't really see that any of these solutions are going to have the kinds of transformational changes that are needed.
I'm not entirely sure there's much else I can say, really. I think it's... but I think perhaps I'll address the adaptation point. I think that's a really important point in that the amount of carbon in the atmosphere means that, as anybody saw my talk, dangerous climate change is already here. The planet is going to change. This country is going to change. It's whether we can avoid catastrophic climate change. And adapting, particularly in local communities, I think it was something that Andrew said in the first talk, in responding to emergencies and catastrophes, be it flooding, heat waves, food shortages, it is always communities and your neighbours that are the key people, and building those communities are really, really important in when you're looking for an emergency, dealing with an emergency, and it's being prepared. And I think in towns and cities, thinking about future heating and strategic tree planting and tree management are going to be really important to provide extra shading at different times. And trying to weave in an animal or a mammal into this. In Stroud, we've got a very successful natural flood management program where we're putting leaky dams and logs in 21% of the whole of the Frome catchment. However, it probably would have been cheaper and potentially more effective if we'd just introduced beavers into the Frome catchment, and I suggest we should look at rewilding and bringing back some of these dynamic keystone species back into our landscape, particularly in the upper reaches of some of our larger rivers, to both enrich our experience of seeing them, but also to provide ecosystem services. Thank you.
Okay. Just two very quick reflections from me on this. In the summing up, we've talked a lot about the personal changes and making personal choices. And of course, that's part of the story. But I think I would urge anyone who's thinking about that to make sure that what we need is system change. Individual behaviour on its own is not going to take us anywhere near enough. And I always say to people who talk to me about personal change and changing their personal setup, make sure you allow at least a significant amount of time to be working with others, i.e. doing politics on system change, because that is absolutely the only way we get there. And secondly, addressing partly that diversity point. I actually, if I say so myself, won a debate at the Oxford Union which had a dreadful topic that suggested that individual apathy is the primary cause of climate change. And I was not, you might be surprised to know, speaking in opposition to that. And I spoke about, a mum not very far from here, if we think about a single mum down in Brixton, who's worrying about her son coming home alive tonight, who's worrying about how her 3 0-hours contract jobs are going to pay the rent at the end of the week, and how she's going to feed her kids. And she's probably not thinking about climate change. And I do not blame her for one iota of that. And if we're going to give people the space and time for the kind of deliberative democracy that you're talking about, we have to actually tackle social inequality. Social inequality is at the basis of miserable lives and lives where people don't have space to do democracy, don't have space to take part in decision making. I often sit in community groups and you say, I've got a saying, politics should be what you do, not have done to you. And you can see lots of the room, and there's a real gender aspect to this. Lots of the women in the room go, how am I going to fit that in? On top of everything else. So social and environmental justice, the survival of our society, are indivisible. We've got to think about inequality and tackling poverty as well as tackling climate change, I would say. And a couple of things I need to do from the chair. First of all, I'd like to thank all of our brilliant speakers today, everyone who's participated. Thank you to all the speakers. And I think I should say thank you to Anne and all of the greenhouse people who've worked so hard today to pull all today together and make it all happen. At which point I hand back to Anne to do the final bit of organising.
You'd be pleased to know I found the book, or somebody found it. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank everybody who's helped out today, from Trudy, who came along and did the registration, to somebody who, sorry, I've forgotten your name, who took over doing the coffee for us and making the coffee, and so thank you ever so much. And to Natalie, of course, for coming along, and all the speakers. So thank you very much.